All right, go ahead.
All right, so this is just a quick tutorial on how to pull saps. This is specifically in an apple orchard, but it can be applied to other orchards or other tree crops. Right now we're in between, this is Golden Delicious, and on this side we have the Red Delicious. And we'll go through each one because their growth pattern is just a little bit different. So first of all, here's the Goldens. And when we pull sap, there's a lot of difference in nutrition between this old leaf at this. So this is this year's shoot, right? So that's what we're looking for. We have old leaves on this year's shoot and we have new leaves on this year's shoot, okay? When we're taking sap, we want to understand the mobile nutrient situation. So a lot of these mobile nutrients are being taken from here or stored in these older leaves and moved to the priority, which is the new growth or the new leaves. So we want to look at, this is a perfect example. This is where the action is happening. We got a tiny little leaf, the first leaf that comes out, and then we've got a second leaf, and we have a third leaf, and the fourth leaf. This second and third and fourth leaf, these are good samples for the old leaf. So you just would pop that off, and that would be put in your old leaf bag. You separate that. You have to separate it. You put them in a Ziploc bag. You put the old leaves, get it labeled and everything, and put that in the Ziploc bag. And
So
then
make sure the petiole's on the
yes,
leaf, right?
yeah, you make sure that you get the full petiole.
Okay.
Okay. And then you'll go, and then I usually do all of the old leaves because I don't want to get confused. So I'll do all the old leaves and then I'll come back into the new leaves. So let's say we did all the old leaves, we'll come back. Now we're looking at the new leaf. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This fourth one looks decent enough, and this fifth one looks decent enough. As in, even this one's probably a little bit better, but it's pretty much fully developed and it's still a new leaf. And I want to understand the nutrients in there, so you'll do the same thing. Pull the petiole. Usually takes 100 grams. So that's how to. The other part of pulling sap analysis that I'll just do right now before we head over to the Red Delicious is you want to do this early in the morning, before 10 o'clock or before 80 degrees. And you'll want to do it on the side. If you notice, the sun is right here from us. So you want to be consistent on where you pull as far as where the sun is hitting. So we always do east facing. So we're pulling on that side of the tree. And then the other point is I'm always pulling in trees in this range here of my, of where I can actually pull, with my arm's length. Now there are going to be some exceptions because most of the time with the orchards that we deal with, this is a representative sample. But sometimes when we're dealing with pecan trees or walnut trees, I will go to the extent of being in a tree squirrel and pulling a little further up because it's a much different sample. But with apples, this is a great sample. Sometimes, so whatever I can reach, that's what I try to pull, right here. Now let's go.
So
over.
real quick, just to
Yeah.
reiterate before we go to the next tree, because the next tree looks real different. If you
Yes.
just point out the active this season shoot growth on here,
Yes,
that's
so-
where we from top to bottom.
That's right. So
Okay.
we see this. You see, this is this year's,
Yep,
right? We
yep.
can see that from last year, they actually pruned a little bit, but that's where it pretty much stopped with the previous year, actually. But you can usually see where shoots begin this year and not. Like right there, that's a perfect example. That was the termination of 1 year's growth, and this is the following year's growth, right? And that went to right here, if you can see that.
Yep.
That was then again the end of 1 year's growth, and then it's pushed again, which was pruned last season. Now this season, this is this year's growth. We don't know how much it'll grow, but this is you can see that this is all this year's growth, and that's where we're gonna distinguish between an old leaf and a new leaf is in this year's current growth. Now, continuing that conversation, this is Red Delicious. Its growth pattern's a little bit different. It likes to spur up like crazy, and so this year's growth is only about, really, if you look down into it, it's about less than an inch, right there. But we can still find, we have an old leaf, the first one, too small, but this one's decent enough. I'll pull that one. This is the next one, I'll pull that one. This is the next one, I'll pull that one. So I got 3 leaves. And then if we go very to the tip of the meristem here, we'll find that this is the newest leaf right there. Bam. So I'll get that with the whole petiole. And since there's not a whole lot of growth on these spurs, I usually end up taking only 1 or 2 from each spur and going on to the next one, because there's just not a lot of space for the old and new. You can see it a little bit better maybe on this one. Once again, there's the first leaf, old, second leaf, also a little bit, well, that one's just a little bit ripped and stuff, so I won't probably take that. But if I go to the next one here, that's a decent leaf, so I'll take it. Probably take the next one, which is this one. There's a couple leaves off of that spur, and then I'll go right to the tip of the meristem, and that's going to be this leaf right there. And that will be my new leaf. Now sometimes you'll have a little bit more of a growth, and that's what you look for, because most of the mobility happens with the elongation of growth, or this shoot. This one's closer to maybe 2 inches, so I have a lot more mobility on this one. So we always look for that, because what we want to understand is what's happening with our nutrients, our mobile nutrients especially. And so having a decent shoot really gives us more insight in what's happening on the translocations of nutrients. So I think that's for the most part it.
One last question here, Clayton, for people sampling. Yes. For our clients. So these little like stunted kind of florets, what should people be thinking when they're looking at this? Should they sample from that, or be going up more to the stronger
Usually you
growth?
Go to the stronger growth.
Yep.
But and that's the point that I was just going to make.
Okay.
It's really important when you're pulling sap analysis that you get what's most representative, and or what your desire is. Okay, so let's say you have an area of the orchard that's a little sickly. That's your priority. So you're going to go and you're going to pull old and new leaf in that sick area. Or let's say your cash crop are like a gala, and so you're going to focus on that orchard, right? Because that's your moneymaker. Or in almonds, it's the non-pareil. So that's going to be where your focus is. Now, when you're in those areas, you want to get what's most representative. Unless, like I said, unless it's an area that struggles and you're just targeting that area. So in this situation here, if we look at all the Red Delicious, most of the Red Delicious is not been spurred up very strong. And so it does need to be a part of the sample, because so much of these Red Delicious trees are the smaller rosettes, smaller spurs with not the elongation like some of the others at the tip. But at the same time, we also want the mobility factor. And so if there are, with each tree, there's these tips that are growing a little stronger, we absolutely need that in our sample too. But when we have, this happens a lot in almonds too, like sometimes this rosette or this spur is just, that's the majority of the orchard, and so you just have to take it, and it takes a long time, but you'll still look for that old leaf, these old leaves, and you'll pull one, and then you go to the tip and you'll pull it, right? And that's gonna, you want to include that in your sample. But there's not a lot of mobility there because there's not growth happening. But since there's not a lot of growth in this orchard, you want to also make sure you get somewhat of a representative sample. But if you strictly want to understand, sometimes I strictly want to understand what's happening with new growth, and so I will only pull the newest leaves, and then I will compare that to these little rosettes, new leaves, just to understand what's happening with the nutrients. And it's very telling. We definitely see a lot more priority going into these new leaves on nutrition, and often the nitrogen levels are higher because it's growing. And so yeah, I mean, it's But hopefully that helps. And I think, yeah, once you get the samples picked, make sure that you put them on ice. Cover the ice a little bit so you don't have the leaves directly on ice, otherwise they get mushy. And then you have to overnight ship them to a lab. Yeah, but you got to keep them cold. You ship them with ice too. But that's sap analysis.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.